This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to showcase the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a legendary human tribal EDH deck with Aragorn the Uniter as the general. Aragorn the United debuted in Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth and is a 5/5 human noble with 4 separate color-dependent triggered abilities for 1 red, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 blue mana. Whenever we cast a white spell, we create a 1/1 white human creature token. Whenever we cast a blue spell, we scry 2. Whenever we cast a red spell, Aragorn deals 3 damage to target opponent. Whenever we cast a green spell, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Note that if we cast a spell that has multiple colors, more than one of Aragorn's abilities may trigger. In this case, we choose the order in which these abilities are put onto the stack. Since multicolored spells can trigger more than one of Aragorn's abilities when cast, and since this is a legendary human tribal build, we plan to inundate the core of this build with numerous multicolored legendary human creature spells for the purposes of maximizing Aragorn's triggered abilities. By creating human creature tokens, manipulating the top of our library, slinging direct damage, and temporarily buffing the power and toughness of our creatures, all while inundating our side of the battlefield with one of the most synergistic and powerful tribes in all of Magic, we will outvalue and outtempo our opponents on the path to imminent victory. Let's begin filling the core of this build with some legendary humans that also create creature tokens. Through Maja, Bredegard Protector's landfall ability, whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. Maja also gives other creatures we control +1/+1. Whenever we cast a creature spell, Tauren's Fist of the Angels creates a 1/1 green and white human soldier creature token with training. Whenever a creature with training attacks with another creature with greater power, we put a +1/+1 counter on the creature with training. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if another human entered the battlefield under our control this turn, then Éowyn Shield Maiden creates 2 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste. Then, if we control at least 6 humans, we draw a card. Note that Éowyn counts herself in her own card-drawing trigger. Also note that any human entering the battlefield under our control during our turn triggers her creature token producing ability, which includes other human creature tokens that we create. We should easily trigger Éowyn's card-drawing ability each and every turn. Whenever we cast a multicolored spell, General Ferris Rokerrick creates a 4/4 red and white golem artifact creature token. Note that these creature tokens are not humans and will not synergize with any of our human or legendary specific spells or abilities. Also note that Ferris has hexproof from monocolored spells and abilities. Whenever a legendary creature with a mana value of at least 4 enters the battlefield under our control, Faramir, Steward of Gondor, has us become the Monarch. As the Monarch, we draw a card at the beginning of our end step, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to us, that creature's controller becomes the Monarch. This version of Faramir has another at the beginning of our end step ability. If we are the Monarch, then we create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens. We traverse a different path to creature token production with Faramir, Prince of Athelion. At the beginning of our end step, we choose an opponent. At the beginning of that player's next end step, we draw a card if they did not attack us during that turn. If they did attack us, then we create 3 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens. For the purposes of clarity, although they are not present in this build, an opponent attacking a planeswalker we control or a battle we are protecting does not count as that opponent attacking us. Now let's turn our attention to enhancing our creatures. At the beginning of combat on our turn, Helana and Alina, partners, puts X +1/+1 counters onto another target creature we control, where X is Helana and Alina's power. That creature gains haste until end of turn. Note that Aragorn's +4/+4 temporary buffing ability makes Helena and Alina's power 6 until end of turn. Whenever Aragorn and Arwen wed enters the battlefield or attacks, we put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control. We also gain 1 life for each other creature we control as well. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on Kyler's Sigardian Emissary. Other humans we control get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Kyler. Note that any human that comes into play under our control puts a +1/+1 counter onto Kyler, and any human on our side of the battlefield gets Kyler's +1/+1 power and toughness boosts, which includes human creature tokens. We can enhance our creatures with more than just power and toughness boosts. We can sacrifice Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard, to give legendary creatures we control +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. Whenever Theoden, King of Gondor, or another human enters the battlefield under our control, target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Samut, Voice of Dissent, has Flash, Double Strike, Vigilance, and Haste, and gives other creatures we control haste as well. We can also pay a white mana and tap Samut to untap another target creature. Samut's haste enablement allows us to send a freshly summoned and/or created army of humans right into combat. Sirach Dragonclaw also has Flash, cannot be countered, gives other creatures we control trample, and prevents creature spells we control from being countered. The presence of Flash and army-wide trample enablement can ambush any opponents that plan to chump block any of our creatures. Sirach can be considered a potential win condition in this build. The same can be said for Aragorn, King of Gondor. When he enters the battlefield, we become the monarch. Whenever Aragorn attacks, up to 1 target creature cannot block this turn. If we are the monarch, then creatures cannot block this turn. Declaring this version of Aragorn as an attacker while the monarch should result in a round of good games soon after. When Éowyn, Fearless Knight, enters the battlefield, we exile target creature an opponent controls with greater power. Legendary creatures we control gain protection from each of that creature's colors until end of turn. Although her ability is a one-and-done effect, it can also be considered a win condition in this build. Our humans can also provide peripheral resources for the purposes of out-tempoing our opponents. Catilda, Dawnheart Prime, gives human creatures we control the ability to tap to add 1 mana of any of that creature's colors to our mana pool. We can also pay 4 a green and a white mana and tap Catilda to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. Inga and Asika gives creatures we control vigilance, and they can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. We can only spend this mana to cast a creature spell. Whenever we cast a creature spell, if 3 or more mana from creatures was spent to cast it, then we draw a card. Getting either of these creatures onto our side of the battlefield during the early portions of the game should yield very favorable results. Speaking of drawing cards, whenever we cast a creature spell, Chulane, Teller of Tales, draws us a card, and then we may put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. We can also pay 3 generic mana and tap Chulane to return target creature we control to its owner's hand. Joyra, Weatherlight Captain, draws us a card whenever we cast a historic spell, which are any artifact, legendary, or saga spells. Whenever Boromir, Gondor's Hope, enters the battlefield or attacks, we look at the top 6 cards of our library. We may reveal a human or artifact card from among them and put it into our hand. We put the rest of these cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. Cards in hand equals problems for opponents. More cards in hand equals more problems for those same opponents. Remember, Aragorn's color-specific abilities are triggered whenever we cast a spell, and not just a creature spell. With that in mind, let's turn our attention to some spells that further complement our tribe, manage the battlefield, and trigger multiple of our general's abilities. Naya Charm deals 3 damage to target creature, returns target card from a graveyard to its owner's hand, or taps all creatures target player controls, while Bant Charm destroys target artifact, puts target creature on the bottom of its owner's library, or counters target instant spell. Broker's Charm gives target creature we control +1/+0 until end of turn, and it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. destroys target enchantment, or draws us 2 cards, while Jeskai Charm puts target creature on top of its owner's library, deals 4 damage to target opponent or planeswalker, or gives creatures we control +1/+1 and lifelink until end of turn. Temur Charm gives target creature +1/+1 until end of turn, and it fights target creature we don't control, which means that each creature deals damage to each other equal to their powers. Temur Charm also counters target spell unless its controller pays 3 generic mana, or creatures with power 3 or less cannot block this turn. Cabaretti Charm deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the number of creatures we control, gives creatures we control +1/+1 and trample until end of turn, or creates 2 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Note that these creature tokens are not humans. Also note that these 6 charms trigger 3 of Aragorn's abilities when they are cast, in addition to providing the benefits of the mode we selected. We have more 3-color options here, but these cards provide more than just one-and-done benefits. Temur Ascendancy gives creatures we control haste, and whenever a creature with a power of at least 4 enters the battlefield under our control, we draw a card. At the beginning of our end step, Broker's Ascendancy puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, and a loyalty counter on each planeswalker we control. At the beginning of our upkeep, Cabaretti Ascendancy has us look at the top card of our library. If it's a creature or a planeswalker card, then we may reveal it and put it into our hand. If we don't put it into our hand, then we may put it on the bottom of our library instead. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, Jeskai Ascendancy gives creatures we control +1/+1 until end of turn, untaps them, and also allows us the option of drawing a card. If we do, then we discard a card. Whirlwind of Thought follows suit, except we do not have to discard a card. We simply draw a card each time we cast a non-creature spell. We have some 2-colored options as well. Simic Charm gives target creature +3/+3, gives permanents we control hexproof until end of turn, or returns target creature to its owner's hand. While Azorius Charm gives creatures we control lifelink until end of turn, draws us a card, or puts target attacking creature on top of its owner's library. Boros Charm deals 4 damage to target player or planeswalker, gives permanents we control indestructible until end of turn, or gives target creature double strike until end of turn. While Izzet Charm counters target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2 generic mana, deals 2 damage to target creature, or draws us 2 cards, and then we discard 2 cards. Flame of Anor allows us to choose 2 of the following instead of 1, as long as we control a wizard as we cast this spell. Target player draws 2 cards, it destroys target artifact, or it deals 5 damage to target creature. Prismari Command allows us to choose 2 of the following 4 modes. It deals 2 damage to any target, has target player draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards, has target player create a treasure token, and or it destroys target artifact. Since the core of this build leans heavily into human tribal synergies, we would be remiss if we failed to include some additional tribal enhancing cards. As Herald's Horn enters the battlefield, we choose humans, of course. Human spells we cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. At the beginning of our upkeep, we look at the top card of our library. If it's a human creature card, we may reveal it and put it into our hand. For more cost reduction for our human creature spells, we have Urza's Incubator. It reduces the casting cost of our humans by 2 generic mana. For more tribal card advantage, we choose humans when Vanquisher's Banner comes into play, and whenever we cast a human creature spell, we draw a card. The banner also gives humans we control +1/+1. Door of Destinies also has a cast trigger. Once more, we choose humans as this artifact enters the battlefield, and whenever we cast a human creature spell, we put a charge counter on to Door of Destinies, and humans we control get +1/+1 for each charge counter on it. Although these artifacts will not trigger any of Aragorn's abilities, they are valuable enough to warrant inclusion into the core of this build. Although Flowering of the White Tree, Shared Animosity, Cathar's Crusade, and Kindred Discovery are only monocolored spells, their value also warrants inclusion into the core of this build. The White Tree gives legendary creatures we control +2/+1 and Ward 1, which means that whenever an opponent targets one of our legendary creatures with a spell or an ability, it is countered unless they pay 1 generic mana. The White Tree also gives non-legendary creatures we control +1/+1, which is noteworthy considering the creature token producing abilities present in this build. Whenever a human creature we control attacks, Shared Animosity gives it +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking human. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, Cathar's Crusade has us put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. Note that this ability is not restricted to just non-token creatures, which means that even our creature tokens will trigger Cathar's Crusade. Kindred Discovery draws us a card each time a human creature enters the battlefield under our control or attacks. And in this build, we should be drawing a lot of cards from this enchantment. Now let's close out this video with a smattering of cards that synergize with and enhance the theme of this build. Level 1 of Bard class has legendary creatures we control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. Level 2 reduces the casting cost of our legendary spells by 1 red and 1 green mana. Note that this effect only reduces the amount of colored mana we pay. Whenever we cast a legendary spell, Level 3 has us exile the top 2 cards of our library. We may play them this turn. Note that gaining a level does not remove abilities that a class had at a previous level. If we reach level 3 of this class, then it gains all 3 of the aforementioned abilities. Rhythm of the Wild prevents creature spells we control from being countered, and it gives non-token creatures we control Riot, which means that they enter the battlefield with either a +1/+1 counter or with haste. Whenever any creature enters the battlefield under our control, Aura Shards gives us the option of destroying target artifact or enchantment. These 2-color enchantments will also trigger 2 of Aragorn's abilities upon casting. With a large enough army, Titanic Ultimatum should end the game. It gives creatures we control +5/+5, First Strike, Lifelink, and Trample until end of turn. It also triggers 3 of Aragorn's abilities. 4th Aralingus creates X 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with Trample and Haste. Also, whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to one or more players this turn, we become the Monarch. Note that we showcased various Monarch synergies earlier in this video as well, which makes 4th Aralingus even more valuable in this type of build. Since we have a sub-theme of creature token production in the core of this build, we would be remiss if we failed to include token doublers like Parallel Lives and Anointed Procession. These enchantments create twice the number of tokens we would create. So does Doubling Season, in addition to doubling the number of counters put onto permanents we control. Note that we do have some +1/+1 counter abilities in the core of this build, making Doubling Season an even worthier inclusion here. Speaking of worthy considerations, if the Vorthos in us is not too strong, then Mondrak Glory Dominus and Ojer Tak Deepest Foundation can enhance our token package even further. Mondrak is not a human creature, but it does double the number of tokens we would create, while Ojer Tak is a god that triples the number of creature tokens we create. Although they are not enchantments like our other token doublers, they have resilience on the battlefield. We can pay 1 and 2 white Phyrexian mana and sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures to put an indestructible counter onto Mondrak. White Phyrexian mana can be paid by either 1 white mana or 2 life. When Ojer Tak dies, it is returned to the battlefield under our control tapped and transformed into Temple of Civilization, a land that can tap to add 1 white mana to our mana pool, or we can pay 2 and 1 white mana and tap it to transform it back into Ojer Tak. We can only activate this ability if we attack with at least 3 creatures this turn, and only as a sorcery. Let's bend but don't break our human tribal theme a little further in order to add a couple of cards to enhance some of Aragorn's abilities, such as Eligeth Crossroads Augur. This legendary Sphinx has us draw cards instead of scrying them, which means when paired alongside Aragorn, whenever we cast a blue spell, we draw 2 cards. Instead of dealing 3 points of damage to target player whenever we cast a red spell through Aragorn's ability, let's deal 9 damage instead by adding Fiery Emancipation or City on Fire. If a source we control would deal damage to a permanent or a player, these enchantments triple that damage instead. Note that City on Fire's Convoke ability allows us to utilize our creatures to help cast it. Each creature we tap while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana or 1 mana of that creature's color. In this build, we can easily cast this spell for 1 or 2 red mana, or possibly for no mana at all. Hopefully, we will be able to cast more spells with our opponents in the future after playing with this build. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a legendary human tribal commander deck with Aragorn the United as the general. The cards showcased during this video are suggested options for crafting the thematic core of a legendary human tribal EDH deck, in addition to providing ways of optimizing this theme. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. In building around videos like this one, these deck components are left in the hands of each individual deck brewer. If you found this video appealing, then be sure to check out our other building around videos through the playlist on your screen. Also be sure to check out our other deck building series, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts about the core of this Aragorn build in the comments section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.